Okay, it is time to build shocks. Now, I highly recommend getting one of these tools. There's a lot of different models. This is made by Pit Tech. As you can tell from the box, I've had this for a long time. Very handy. Having a pair of shock pliers is also an essential item. There's different types. I particularly like this Techno because, well, it has the two main sizes of shock shafts you're going to come across. It's also got a ball link tool. And perhaps the most important part is how easy it is on your hands. It's long, so you've got a lot of leverage. It's smooth and rounded, so it doesn't rip apart your hands. Let me just give you an example if it's not in my travel box. Yeah, not handy at the moment. Oh, here we go, yeah. Now this has three different sizes, 3, 3.5, and 4 millimeter, respectively. But these arms are narrow, they're edged, and they are brutal on your hand after a little while. And they're also not nearly as long from the pivot. It's like almost half the length. So I definitely recommend this. They're a little pricey, but you get what you pay for, and no better investment than good tools. So let's open our bag of shock parts. And as you can see, they provide us with some silicone shock oil. This is not what I'm going to use. I'm using TLR fluids, but I'm going to be using 30 in the rear and 35 in the front. And I'm going to be swapping out a pair of the pistons. They give us a pair of 1.7s and a pair of 1.6s. All the Pro builds are running 1.7s front and rear. So what they're basically doing is they're adjusting with the weight of the fluid versus the size of the holes. I bought a set of the 1.7, so I've got that set up all the way around. TLR 233016, they're $10 or $12. Definitely worth it. Now, as far as the springs go, that's something that's going to have to be played with. I'm going to use the stock springs that are provided with the kit to start, and then I'll mix and match from there. I've got a huge selection of springs for buggies, short course trucks, different off-road vehicles, Associated, TLR, several other brands as well. And that's something you'll see a lot of people swap from one to another. I was trying to find one of the more popular front springs that people were using. It's a Kyosho Red. It's not made or just not available at the moment. Just to give you some examples. Let me read you a few of the different setups people are using. Let's see, front Associated white spring, TLR 35 weight front, that's the shock oil, TLR 30 weight rear, with the yellow kit spring. So that right there, that's the closest to stock. Kyosho gold in the front, 35 weight lube. Kyosho white in the rear, 30 weight. You're going to hear a lot of 35 and 30, something that I'm going to run. Short course truck front, associated red. And they even give a part number, 91835. 37.5 and 35. AE yellow, it's associated yellow, and part number as well. For the rear on that setup, here's another Kyosho gold, Kyosho white with 35 and 30. Let's see. Associated red, associated yellow. Now, you got to watch out when they say yellow, especially when it comes to TLR. TLR's got like 4 different yellow rear springs. And then it's front versus rear springs too. They're going to have a yellow front. It can get very confusing, and springs are really a trial and error kind of thing. What works best for the conditions, for your driving style. You know, you noticed in that list there were a lot of Kyosho springs, a lot of associated springs, as you know, because the difference in weight on the spring might be fairly subtle, especially when you're going between brands. So something you gotta tinker with. The nice thing about springs is they're easy, you know, to swap out and try. Whereas shock fluid is a lot more difficult. You gotta, you know, uncap it and drain it and clean it, and you're basically doing a full shock rebuild anytime you change fluid. So if you can, you know, be stable with your shock fluid mix, like the 30-35, and just play with springs, you're in good shape. Then there's things like how long the stroke is going to be. A lot of people are running a slightly shorter stroke. They're putting in a couple spacers, and I'll be comparing all of that against the stock build. I'm glad these are emulsion shocks. They have a bleed screw and a little gasket. I much prefer to build shocks that way as opposed to using bladders and such. That's just me. I find I get a more consistent build as far as, you know, the left shock to the right shock being, you know, identical, or at least very, very similar in their weight. And so I'm going to go ahead right off the bat and take these screws and these little gaskets, and I'm going to put them in the caps. Now, I'm not going to tighten them down. I just setting them where I'll have them aside. TLR makes really good shocks, I have to say. Sorry about that. Had the camera at an odd angle there. Basically, I've just been unbagging the various parts, getting everything ready. Now, we have something that's a little different here. We've got the 1.7s that I bought that are flat on both sides. We have the 1.7s that came with this that are a little, they're shorter. And they got a little raised section in the middle. That, hopefully that shows. So I got to think about which pair I'm going to put where, as long as I don't do them, you know, one in the front, one in the rear, and then everything's odd left to right. I think I'll put those in the rear and put the ones that I bought up front. Oh, I need to get my needle nose. Be careful with these little C-clips. They can shoot across the room if you don't get them snapped in right. Make sure that you can rotate them. They should spin freely once they're clipped in. Let's see. Make sure you don't switch out your shock shafts, that you got the 2 fronts and 2 rears together. You have got to be kidding me. Those are not the right shocks. The pistons. The pistons that I ordered are the ones that have that thing on the bottom, and they're not the right diameter. God, TLR is really mixing stuff up. That's frustrating. Okay, I gotta take these apart. It looks like I'm gonna have to be stuck running the 1.6s and 1.7s, at least for the time being. Unless I've got some other TLR pistons that will fit. Let's see. Well, those are not the same size either. The inner diameter on the hole, I can see the difference. That's weird. Okay, now I need to try to pop these C-clips without losing any. That's one. So I have to swap this right now. And that is really odd that they have this different size hole for the shaft here, because this is a 22, and I just checked it and compared it to pistons for my 22 5.0 DC buggy, and it's the smaller size. You would think all the 22s would have the same size shock shafts, but apparently not. So don't run out and order that part number I just gave you, because you're going to get something that doesn't fit. I will try to source those and get you a legit part number, because I am going to want to go 1/7 front and rear as soon as I can. But what I think I'm going to do to balance it out in the meantime, instead of going 35 and 30, I'll go 35 and 32.5, and that'll help make up for the difference up front. So let's start with these guys here. These are our preload adjusters, and what you want to do is get a little bit of lube on them. Let's see, I'll just use this shock fluid will work just fine. I was thinking about going with a little bit of oil, but it doesn't matter. Just put like a drop in the groove there and kind of run it around. It'll make these screw on to the shock bodies a lot easier. Otherwise they can really stick. The little rubber O-ring is designed to provide some resistance so that the shocks don't unwind on you. But at the same time, you don't want them so stiff that you can't make adjustments. Now, be very careful when you put these collars on. You don't want to cross thread them. If it starts to... Yes! Let me pause out. That's what we call wifus interruptus. So as you can see, this goes on nice and easy. If I was just running that with the O-ring dry, it would be really stiff and really hard to move. And it's got more than enough resistance that it's not going to move unless you put hands on it. But it's it's just right. When I do shocks, I always kind of do it like an assembly line, do all the pistons, do all the collars, that kind of thing, one after another until you're all done. Now, something they don't provide in the kit is this stuff. Associated makes a product like it called Green Slime. It's shock O-ring grease. And you use this on the O-rings that go in here, your shock seals. And it keeps them from swelling, which will bind things up. It also makes them last longer. It lubricates them properly. So let's see, we've got several different O-rings here. So we have 4 larger and 4 slightly smaller O-rings. And the larger ones go at the top of our shock bodies right there, provides a seal against the cap. See, for those of you who get the cheap Chinese cars, this is the difference. One of the many differences is the quality of the shock absorbers. You don't get all these seals and such. Our other small O-rings go down here at the bottom, and those seal up with the black caps. Okay. So, okay, for our rear, we go with a 1mm and a 2mm spacer. That should take our stroke down to, doing those wrong, rear. Should bring our stroke down to about 33mm, which is what most people seem to be running. So basically, well, not basically, exactly what these do, depending on how many of them you use, is it limits how long the final assembly is going to be. So every time you add another one, you're notching up how tall the shock is going to be. And it also limits how much internal throw that you get. And then we're going to do a 1mm on each of the fronts. Okay, so now we need our O-rings, and we've got these little caps. These go inside the cap. As you can see, there's a raised ridge on either side, so it doesn't matter which side you put it on, but that's going to go inside the cap like that, and that centers it. So we need one of these per shock. And then two of these. So let's start by putting some of this grease inside here. I'm going to smush this around a little bit. It's been sitting a bit. Just make sure it's not separating. Go ahead and be liberal with it. Because any excess you're just going to wipe off anyway. Try and fill in that little edge a bit. Okay, now this is important. Do not tighten this cap down. Put it down most of the way, but do not tighten it. If you do, you're going to squeeze these O-rings, which is going to close them up, and then when you slide this on, you're going to tear with the threads on the seal and potentially damage them. Another good thing to do is waste a little bit of this grease on the threads. Now you can tighten this down. And you should have a nice smooth action there. No no binding. Remember, not all the way down until you get the shock in, or the shaft. Might as well salvage that little bit. And now we can tighten this the rest of the way. Now, make sure you know front from rear when you do your fluid. Wait a second. Almost forgot. Now, you notice I haven't done it all the way. You want to push up the piston slowly and then pull it down quick, getting any air bubbles out from under the piston. And then we want to let it sit. Again, same thing. Now don't yank it down too fast or it will squirt fluid all over you. But you want to do it enough. See? A little too fast. Clean after. That way you can not have to worry about things being a mess down the road when you need them. Wait as long as you need to for all those bubbles to get out. You do not want air in your shocks. Now, as long as I'm doing that, I'm going to take a second and I'm going to fill in my sheet here. So the oil, I'm using TLR 35 up front and a 1.6x2. Really, that should be the other way, 2x1.6 is the correct way to do it. In other words, two 1.6 millimeter holes. And the spring, I'm using the blue kit spring. And for the rear, I'm using TLR 32.5 2x1.7 millimeters. And the spring is yellow kit. You see, and by recording all these things, you bring blank sheets with you. And like every day you go to the track, you know, name, date, city, state, and the track that you're at, most important. Describe your track conditions: indoor, outdoor, tight, open, smooth, rough, hard packed, loose and loamy, blue groove, dry, wet, dusty, grass, astroturf, low bite, medium bite, high bite, other. Fill all that in. That way you've got an idea of what conditions your setup worked or didn't work in. And then you make changes as needed. Things like toe, ride height, camber, I'm leaving blank until I actually get to that part, because those are tuning. A lot of these things are fit, where at like caster, it's either 0 or 5 degrees of caster. That's a mechanical item that you put on that makes that change. So it's not an adjustment. Like toe is an amount of degrees that you've towed in the front. That in the front is done by adjusting your links, whereas in the rear toe is done mechanically. It's done by putting in one of those little pucks, and that's recorded down here at toe inserts, 3 degrees toe, anti-squat 2 degrees. So all things that you should record: any weights, your electronics, tires, etc., the position of everything. Some things are listed twice. For example, shock locations is 2 and middle, and it's also here. I've circled 2 and then circled middle, because those are the positions where I'm going to be putting those, mounting those shocks. So recording all that gives you a baseline, and I even wrote here, first build. So when I go to the track for the first time with this truck, and I start tinkering with stuff, every time I make a change, I'll just make a note on this sheet, and then at the end of the day, I'll take out a fresh sheet and write in all the markups. And that way I've got a sheet for that day. Excuse me. So let's see how these are looking. Pretty good. Need that yet, so I don't want to seal it up. Let's see if they have anything interesting in here. Okay, this is the interesting part. So this is where we bleed the shocks. This is also the messy part. I usually put the screw on the wrench just so it's ready. Now, another thing I also like to do is, I prefer to use paper towels for this. Wrap the shock up in a towel so that, in fact, that's more than I need there. I want to be able to get to the shaft down below. Okay. Is there any bubbles left in there? I don't think so. Let me make sure that that's enough. Better to waste a little. I have to undo it and do it again. Now, the screw is out, so nothing's going to happen when we tighten this down. And we do want that tight. Now, what we want to do is slowly, you want to have the hole facing up, have it at a slight angle, and we're going to push the piston up slowly and let it bleed out anything that will come out. Okay, now that it's all the way to the top, I can go ahead and put in this screw. You don't have to go crazy tightening that, just enough. Okay. See what we got, a little bit of rebound. See that? You push it in, you got a little bounce back. Try working the shock a little bit. It's got some serious damping there. I almost wonder if 35 isn't a little much. Well, I'll try it, but if it's not handling well, if the suspension isn't responding well, the first thing I'm going to do is go down to 32.5 up front. These are pretty solid springs though, so, and it's a heavy truck. Plus I put that extra weight up front, so 6 of one, half dozen of the other. Now, what I want, ideally, now that I've done one of them, I want the next front one to have the same amount of rebound. Now remember, screw hole up, push the piston up slowly. So I really had just the right amount of fluid there. I was worried that nothing was going to come out. Notice how I'm using my second to last finger down here to hold the piston, to keep it from dropping down while I'm tightening this drain screw here. So feels good. Not quite the same, but it's retracting slowly. That's pretty close. I think that's close enough for government work. Let me go ahead and cap this off. Always use that inner cap with these bottles if you use the TLR fluid, otherwise they will leak all over your toolbox. And it's a good idea to get a handful of small boxes. I've got 3 of these little crates here, and I keep all my different fluids in there, different brands. I've got a lot of Associated and a lot of TLR, and then I've got some Axial, another no-name brand bottles. I've also got 2 more of those full of various diff fluids. So as you get more into the hobby and you start building more and more cars, you're going to find that you need a lot of different storage devices. Now, you're not going to bring all of those to the track, but you might want to, let's say I'm bringing this to the track and it's the only car I'm bringing, or I'm bringing this and my buggy and a short course truck and also in 10th scale, all of which are, say, 2-wheel drives. So I don't have any, unlikely that I'm going to be doing any diff fluid changes. And I might bring 30, 32.5, 35, and 37.5 fluids with me. So I've got a range in case I'm not happy with the results I'm getting and I want to make a change. I would also bring my spring boxes with all of my 10th scale springs, anything that would fit these types of shocks, regardless of manufacturer. And then, of course, I would bring my parts boxes, the fishing boxes, the tackle boxes for each of the cars that I have with me. So let's bleed this one. Hold the piston up. Remember, this doesn't need to be super tight. That little brass washer is going to compress a little bit and act as a, it might be bronze, but that's going to act as a seal. And you can really feel the difference. these are much stiffer. But it's also going to be a stiffer spring because it's the front end suspension, which is unusual, or let's just say it's not what you would think it would be. You would think that, okay, the motor's at the back, the battery's toward the rear. I really need stiffer stuff up in the front end, stiffer springs, stiffer, tighter fluid. But that's not the case. The front end is where you tend to land a lot. It just has, it takes more pressure for, reasons, let's just say. And so usually you're running a stiffer spring and thicker fluid in the front than you are in the rear on any given vehicle. Okay. So again, it's close. It's not 100%. It's still slowly eking in a little bit. I think that's, again, good enough.